Park. We have Professor Ravindran also here live with us, and looks like everybody is bothered about social distancing, so there aren't too many people here. But if you're thinking of coming over, do that. We are going to be having the privilege of listening to Professor Ravindran. I'll come to what his talk is going to be about and how we will have a lot of interesting things that we'll hear from him, I'm sure. But I thought it'd be interesting for us to actually take a look at the webinar series itself to begin with. So the series has started since July of 2021, in pretty much during the tail end of the last wave. And this is got multiple types of events. This particular session is part of our Faculty of the Month series. So we have had many distinguished faculty talk to us. This is the session itself, series itself is designed to bring the best of the IIT Alumni Center Chennai's ecosystem together in a mixed physical digital fashion. The initial sessions, of course, were online only. This is actually our third session live in the Alumni Center. We had Ashwin Mahalingam and Meenakshi Ramesh do our first live session in early November, which was actually very well attended. There were 30 people here at the quiz. Then we had Raju Venkatraman hosting our Voices of Excellence series, where he interviewed Chris Krishnan just about a couple of weeks ago. And now we have the privilege of hosting Professor Balraman Ravindran, Professor of Computer Science and Engineering at IIT Madras. And his topic is going to be, is AI ready for the real world? Right? So this is, as I said earlier, the Faculty of the Month series. Many distinguished faculty from IIT Madras have spoken before. Professor Krishnan Balasubramaniam, Professor Mahindra Agarwal of IIT Kanpur, who spoke on the Sutra model of the pandemic prediction. We had Professor Arvind Chandran from IIT Madras. We had Professor Bhaskar Ramamurthy as well, speaking about 5G. And of course, the other parts of our webinar series have had the Voices of Excellence series. I mentioned Chris was interviewed. We've had Professor Ashok Jhunjhunwala speak. We've had Mr. N. Lakshminarayanan speak as well. And many other things. Startup of the Month has had Panis Technologies, Team Hyperloop from IIT Madras. We have had fun sessions as well. The quiz, of course, very popular. But I will be hosting a quiz in early February. So if you're quizzers, then please look out for that. But we have had a storytelling session. We have had a musician of the quarter. We have had a very interesting session early on by the CEO of Story Trails, Vijay Kamalakara, on unexpected tales behind Indian monuments. So the webinar series is off to a good start. And now, as I said, we're exploring how we can do this physically as well. We'll see how it goes, pandemic and other things permitting. So thank you again, Professor Ravindran, for being here. And just as a brief introduction, his detailed bio is up on the invitation site itself. But he heads the Robert Bosch Center for Data Science and AI at IIT Madras, and he's the Mindtree Faculty Fellow and Professor in the Department of Computer Science and Engineering at IIT Madras. Very distinguished career, and if I may say so, I know you for several years now, and you're perhaps one of the top computer scientists in AI in the country and perhaps the world as well. And you're really working with so many different companies, plus, of course, preserving your academic rigor and roots. So the title for today is AI Ready for the Real World? At first glance, this might seem like a rhetorical question. We're all very familiar with AI as part of our daily life in search, in navigation, e-commerce, social media, etc., etc. But AI-based approaches are being increasingly deployed in critical domains, industrial domains, finance, healthcare, policing, public policy, national defense, and so on. So therefore, AI in the consumer world is fairly, I would say, reasonably known. But as we now enter into the 2020s, is it something that we should pay more attention to in other domains, the industrial and other domains? So over to you, Professor Ravindran, and then after about, I guess your talk is over in about half an hour, we will take questions. There are now people live here as well. Welcome, and we have about, I think, 50 people on the webinar and coming in as we speak. So over to you, Professor Ravindran, and then I'll kick off with a few questions, and then we will invite questions from the audience. Dinner is to follow for all the brave souls who are here. If you're online and you want to come for a free dinner, come over. And then we will have fun. Over to you, sir. Thank you. Let me mute myself.
Okay, great. Just give me one sec. So, good evening. Okay. Okay. Good evening, folks. And so I'm happy to be doing this talk here. And so the question I'm asking at the beginning, right, is AI ready for the real world? Right. Well, the answer is no. Right. So we already see AI everywhere. I mean, that's the initial. I should request to be not made the co-host, because wherever anybody joins, I get this pop-up asking for letting them in. Thanks. As the co-host, I'm not able to do that. So sorry about that. So I keep getting these pop-ups on my screen, and I have to dismiss them. So you know, AI is everywhere, right? So all of us know we use that in our everyday life, and whether it is shopping or whether it's navigation or any kind of social media, when you use web search, right? And even more serious things like you know, getting your X-rays screened and things like that. So AI is basically everywhere. Okay. Yeah, I mean, so he made me the co-host so that I can share the screen. He could have just enabled participants to share the screen instead of making me the co-host. So that made it. Sorry. So again, I mean, just to continue on the same theme, right? So AI is everywhere, right? So whether just talking about kind of the consumer space, but you can also think of places like financial decisions, and also in looking at legal decisions like bail decisions and so on and so forth. We see that. So AI is actually. Okay, so AI is actually entering into all spheres of decision making, right? And in fact, it is not just these. The more recent, I'm not sure how many of you have seen the more recent news items that have been coming out, but AI is beginning to have significant non-trivial impact in science. Right? So whether it is in chemistry or whether it is in biology, this is a little dated now. But both the mathematical contributions of AI, where they looked at solving the knot conjecture, which is like this is like a week old, and this is like 3 days old news. Right, so AI is now beginning to create impact in all varieties of domains. Right, so and here is my fun slide for AI is everywhere. Right? So now it's even flipping burgers for you. So that's a robot called Flippy that can do this, right? Okay, Ananth, if you have host privileges, can you? So the prevalent thinking, right? So is that all you really need to succeed with AI is that you need large volumes of data, so preferably tagged data, right? Some problems you don't even need that. You only say that you need some kind of a simulation model. The mic, it wouldn't help, but I'll try. Okay, is it better? Perfect. Thank you. All you need to succeed, right? That's the current thinking. Is all you need to succeed is large volumes of data, right? And some problems you need only a simulation model. It's one of the most successful examples of that is all the noise that was made with this Go player that used AI, right? And it learned by just playing against itself. So what is amazing about it is it came up with all kinds of non-intuitive moves. So here is a very infamous move 37 in the second game it played in that match with Lee Sedol, right? Look at some of the comments. So one of the players said that's a very strange move. Another commentator said, I thought it was a mistake. because it was somehow going beyond, what. Yeah, thanks. Can you make me the non-co-host? But still allow me to share screen. So for people who are confused why we are stopping it, every time I get a pop-up, right, it completely blocks the slide for the 4 people who are physically present and me. So I need to dismiss it before I can continue. So that's the reason I have to stop every time I get a pop-up. Right? Perfect. Perfect. Yeah. And so it's such a confusing move for Lee Sedol. It took a full 15 minutes before he could even reply to that, right? So it was something that was completely non-intuitive. It learned through self-play, right? So all of these things should, make us feel that, hey, AI has really arrived, right? So it doesn't really need labeled data. So there are things that, it can just learn through self-play. Right? So even so with all this, right, people are now, a lot of investment is going into, building wonderful data sets. A lot of energy is spent. In fact, there are companies even in Chennai that are built up only on, labeling data, annotating data. Right? That's their only USP. Right? And so you have all these phrases like data is the new oil, data is the new water, whatever. Right? So, but then this is one thing I wanted to think about. This is not really how humans learn, right? So AI started off with this whole motivation of, that it's trying to imitate human intelligence or at least simulate human intelligence at some level, right? But this is not really how humans learn. So we typically have teachers, right? So who kind of tell us what, introduce us to some kind of basic principles of the world, and we just don't learn from examples. And so this causes problems. Right? So what kind of problems? As long as the going is good, it's all fine, right? So this is an image captioning problem. So you have a person riding a motorcycle on a dirt road. Perfect. That's the caption generated by an AI. Right? So 2 dogs playing in the grass is okay. 3, 2, it's all fine. And then it says a skateboarder does a trick on a ramp, but it's obviously a cyclist. Right? And then it says a little girl in a pink hat is blowing bubbles. Right now we are entering into hallucination territory. Right? So there are no bubbles in the picture, obviously. Right? So when the going is good, it's all fine. But when something goes wrong, right? So we basically have to ask questions. What happened? So these seem like minor things, but then AI can give rise to serious ethical questions as well, right? So, for example, GPT-3 is created a lot of buzz last year, right? It said, "Oh wow, almost natural sounding language," and people were in blind tests. Sometimes people were finding it difficult to figure out which was human generated, which was AI generated language, and all that. But then it also reflects societal biases in gender, race, and religion. So it can generate really skewed, what would be not considered kosher text, right? And AI is sending wrong people to jail, right? And there is a very famous case of this Detroit man getting arrested, pulled out of his house and getting arrested because the facial recognition software identified him incorrectly, right? So while this might seem funny, we are no longer entering in the funny territory, right? So in fact, if you take a picture of Obama and ask AI to fix it, right, it makes him a white man. That's how biased AI can become sometimes without realizing what they are getting into. So the fundamental problem that we face in using AI everywhere, right? So we'll come back to in what way does this fundamental problem reflect in the performance, right? Is that we are learning associations just from data. And we're really not thinking about any of the structure of the world or any of the world processing, right? So in fact, you'll see later that a bus will be labeled as an ostrich. So it's really like a wheeled ostrich. You don't think about it, right? And it also doesn't have any information about the processes of the world, right? So what really causes cancer? But it can look at, X-rays of lung, right? Scans of the lung and identify lumps and say, okay, these are cancerous lumps. But it really doesn't know why that means that it's cancer. As long as you're aware of that and you're using it as a tool, it's fine. It's only when you start, going beyond that, it becomes a problem, right? So let's look at a few problems that I'm going to call out specifically, right? So typically, AI, you can think of it as you have data, right? And you have algorithms that take this data, right? And they're going to create a model, right? Based on which you make decisions that are then applied to the world. So the whole crux of what I'm talking about is, hey, that link is broken. Right? So you can make models, but when you try to apply it to the world, you can run into problems. Right? So let's look at what are the problems you could have. This is, I don't know how many of you remember this from the news stories a couple of months back. Right? So when you search for the ugliest language in India, Google returned Kannada. Right? I'm pretty sure there was some Tamil engineers involved in the result coming out this way. But this is something that happened, and Google actually had to apologize for this. Right? And this is something what they said. Sometimes the way content is described on the internet can yield surprising results to specific queries. And this is kind of washing their hands off in some sense, but given the scale at which they are operating, I don't know. It's very hard to see how they can get around this. Right? But this is an issue, right? So here is another example. So this was this bail system that I was talking about earlier, right? I said that Maryland people are using AI to make decisions on bail. And so here is what happened, two particular cases, right? So this Vernon Prater was assigned as low risk, right, by the AI system, and Prisha Borden was assigned as high risk by the AI system, right? And it turns out that Vernon Prater's prior offenses are 2 armed robberies and 1 attempted armed robbery. And after he was given bail, he was arrested again for a grand theft. And Prisha Borden, prior offenses were basically 4 juvenile misdemeanors, and there is absolutely no further offense after she was released on bail, right? But the AI kind of had the white man as low risk and the black girl as a high risk person. Now people are beginning to understand these issues, right? But most of the studies you see will be actually in the Western context. I have no clue how that AI would behave if you start applying to the Indian population. No one has it. We're happily talking about applying it to, right? So we're running headlong into adopting AI in all kinds of governance issues and the policing issues and things like that. But we really need to study all of these potential fallouts of using AI, right? In the Indian context as well. And more, right? So here is a summary of this, right? So labeled high risk, right, but did not re-offend. Nearly 50% of the African Americans, right, who were labeled as high risk did not re-offend, while only a quarter, right, of the whites, right, did not. Similarly, labeled as low risk, but still went ahead and committed another crime, right? Nearly 50% of the whites and a quarter of the blacks. It's kind of flipped all over. We can see the bias that was entrenched in this.
So what should have been done?
Okay, so first of okay, good. So the question is, what should have been done differently in this setting, right? So the first thing is, you should be aware of what kind of biases are operated in the setting earlier. Everyone knows that policing in the US is biased against the blacks, right? So you should have actually created race as some kind of what is called a protected attribute. And then whatever model you build, you should have tested against the protected. Let's say that, hey, is this model skewed with respect to this protected attribute or not? In fact, there are ways in which you can actually put it in during the model building itself so that the skew doesn't arise. But at least we should test after the model is built, whether the skew is there or not. Right? So there is no universal answer to this. It has to always do with your knowledge of the domain that you're operating in. So it's not something that the computer science people, the IT people can just solve it. There has to be some amount of information that comes in. In fact, we actually did a recent study in ITM. We took the same data, right? And then we looked at, even if I remove race as a decision-making attribute, right? What were the other pathways through which race influences the decision? Okay, so for example, race influences the decision through levels of income. Race influences the decision through education. Right? What is the highest degree that you have? How many years of schooling have you got? Right? Because all of these are strongly correlated with race in that society. So it's not just enough to remove race as an attribute and say that I'm going to build a new classifier with that. So it's not an easy answer. Right? It's very subtle, and it has to very much be tuned to the domain that you are in.
how do you factor self-learning into
So what is self-learning?
that is exaggerated.
See,
So,
so
based on results, and for example,
So-
the point that it was actually the reverse.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then once you learn the concept, algorithm learns it.
Sure. So it depends on how you set it up, right? So AI by itself is not magically will not do self-learning, right? So it depends on how you set up the data set. So initially, the way they trained it was looking at how previous bail decisions were handled by humans, right? And they used that as the data for which the AI was learning. So in some sense, if humans had gone back and done self-learning, right, this wouldn't have, wouldn't have existed. This bias wouldn't have existed in the data. So with AI, it is possible to do that. It's just that the system was not set up to do it. The way you should do it is, okay, I'm going to make a decision, right, which is basically matching the human decision, right? So I'll first initially match the human decision, and then I'll let the system play out for a while, and then look at what happens really, whether the human decision was right or wrong. And then I'll go back and train my AI again. But this choice of how to do this, right? The choice of making it an iterative process is done by the humans. So it's not something that AI would do. And it's not easy to do. Because in this particular case, they actually followed up with a small subset of the people who are granted bail and then track their case. But really, for you to set up a proper self-training system or iterative system, right? You have to track everybody whom you give bail to. Right? Literally, you have to get information from your entire this whole the parole system, and all that information has to feed into this, right? So, in theory, it's possible. It's just that logistically, it will take a long time to set up something like that. Right? And it's just in one domain. I mean, if you want to do this in every domain, it's going to be even more painful. So, just like every technology, right? A lot of engineering decisions, calls that we have to make depending on what is the cost of deployment and things like that. And based on that, we basically come up with some, compromise.
So basically, you're not saying that it's not possible by or are you saying?
I'm not saying it's not possible. I'm saying it's possible, but the humans have to design the system so that the AI can do it. And right now, that system is not in place. So it's not like. So I don't want to, anthropomorphize AI, right? So it's not something that it can do by itself. So we have to set up the system so that as an algorithm it can do it.
That's part of the labeling.
Sorry. Partly it's the labeling part. So the initial labeling is happened because of human decisions that are already taken. Then that is a ground truth, right? The humans are saying they're going to re-offend or not re-offend, and based on that you are making decisions. But then there is ground truth. They can actually follow people and see how many of them re-offended, how many of them didn't re-offend, right? I should move on.
There is a comment from Ananth Krishnan. Says,
I'm turning my head.
It says that AI seems to be using 90% of its decision based on past data, and that was brought down to 50%.
It can be brought down to 0%. Okay, fine. Let me bring up the. How do I bring up the chat window? I don't know how to bring up the chat window here. Okay, fine. Okay, you just keep. Yeah, I'll just answer the question. So, getting back to the same, I think you are asking a similar question, right?
Yeah, but usually you have something known as a training set, a validation set, the test set.
All of these are labeled by humans.
Yeah, all are given by humans.
Yeah.
Once you get very decent results.
Sorry?
In a test result.
Yeah.
In a test set, the range of your model is very well trained.
Yeah, see, what my test result will tell me, for example, in the bail case, right? How many decisions have I agreed with the human who was given the bail, right? So, but the point we are making here is the human decisions are also incorrect. They were actually would have denied bail to a black woman, right? So that's the point that we are trying to make here. So it's not like just because you use the AI system, the bias is going away. It's still there.
It should be solved. It cannot be that, it's got to be post factum.
Sorry?
It has to be post factum.
See, that's what exactly the point I was making earlier, right? So getting the ground truth itself is required systemic changes.
Yeah.
Right? So that's what I'm saying. Right? It's not easy that for you to make it. Right? It's not something that AI can solve. Right? It has to be a system-wide decision that has to be made. That's exactly the point I'm making. Right? So when you say you're going to use an AI system, they actually did it, right? They actually put an AI system that was trained on this data. They're making these kinds of errors. It was deployed in a court in Maryland. That's one of the first slides that I had, right? So they actually deployed this in the field before they realized that these kind of issues are going to come. So going back to the question that from the chat, right? So yes, you can reduce the amount of human label data that you are using, right? But that is a challenge. Right? It's a little more subtle. So let us take this bail decision setting, right? How am I going to gradually reduce the human label data for my training? So I'm going to track people on whom I have made decisions, right? Now, if that is a person, right, a black young woman, 18, right, who has done some misdemeanors, who my system currently says is high risk. So how will I know whether she will recommit a crime or not until I release her? Right? If I go by what my decision, what my machine is currently saying, what my AI is currently saying, she is somebody who has a high risk of committing a crime, I should not be releasing her. Right? But then how will I get the ground truth in this ground truth, right? That she was high risk, but even then she never committed a crime. How will I get that ground truth? So once I start putting a decision-making system into the loop, right? And then I'm going to say, I'm going to study the real ground truth of what happened after the decisions were made. I really have to start doing some meta decisions about when am I going to override the decisions of the AI. So it becomes even more and more subtle, and it gets very, very complicated in terms of how I'm going to generate this valid ground truth data. Right? So from an actual system design perspective, it's very complicated. That's why we end up, looking at this large data that was selected earlier and labeled by humans, and then we go ahead and build the system. Because once I put the system in place, after that, the whole sampling bias is heavily influenced by what the system does.
Assume that training data that we got is from the same universe from which the future can grow from, right? But regarding different model might not come.
That's not an entirely different scenario, right? I mean, the same scenario. I said we want to correct the biases that were there, the decisions that were made earlier, right? That's exactly the argument that we are saying.
Question is, if you constantly feed back data to the model, then that should take care of it.
So I'm just saying that data that you feed back in will become more and more biased, more and more skewed, because it will be only the people who you thought were low risk to get released. Only those people's data will come back into the system, right? People you thought were high risk, whom you denied bail to. Right? You don't refine their data. No. So the way the system is built up, the data that gets fed back is going to, the sample itself is going to be very highly biased based on the functioning of your system. Right? It's still the same social ecosystem in which they are immersed, right? That doesn't change. But still there's a lot more challenging.
Selection of data itself be run by a machine. So it's a recursive question.
Yeah.
So there's a recursive question that the selection of the data set either the initial or the future ones itself being given to a machine to select.
Yeah. So yes, there's a lot of work. No, there's a lot of work that happens in that space, right? So for example, we do this work, right? So that the label data is initially unlabeled, right? And so I run an algorithm that will select data points that I want to be labeled. Instead of blindly saying that here are 10,000 points, please label them for me. I can say I can select 1,000 from it and label. So that reduces the labeling effort significantly, right? So these kinds of approaches are called active learning approaches, where the learning algorithm chooses what it wants to learn on, right? And there are well-defined techniques for doing it and so on and so forth. But that still doesn't help us address the bias problem. So this is an orthogonal dimension, but we can certainly reduce the labeling effort, labeling both in terms of how much the labelers have to look. In fact, we try getting labels from radiologists, right? So it's impossible to get them to do more than 10 or something in a sitting, right? So it's better to do something clever, right? But that it still doesn't address many of the issues that we're talking about. So active learning is one thing that overall it reduces the labeling effort, but not necessarily address the bias or some of the other things I'm going to talk about.
So you know all the questions.
Yeah, I think we'll just. I'm on slide 18. I think I have 45. So. But it's okay to have a discussion. I don't have to finish all my slides, but I'm just saying. Yeah. So this was in the news some time back. I don't know how many of you have seen this. Amazon had this tool which they tried it on all their previous recruiting decisions, and then when they actually rolled it out, the number of women who were hired went even further down. Already they were hiring few women. Number of women went further down because of this inherent bias in the data, which the AI for some reason learned to amplify. Right? So maybe they were making some exceptions and hiring women for equal opportunity or something, but the AI didn't have that built into it, so it was making all these errors. Right? So this is the first, or first problem with AI. I'm talking about fair AI that's socially acceptable, right? Formalizing notions of fairness and ethics. Right, and exploring the legal and semantic differences, right, between Indian ethos and Western notions of fairness. In fact, I always tell people, right. So in the West, you always want to make sure that blacks and whites are equally represented or something like that. In India, you don't want to. Right? In India, you have all this very complicated, social justice system and other things in place. How do you make sure that you build an AI that actually conforms to the norms that the Indian government wants you to conform to? So instead of doing a post hoc filtering, I can always come up with some jugaad solution for it. Yeah. No, sir, I don't think so, sir. Yeah.
That is used as a basic past data. The last time that we used it. Obviously, the system will understand that OBCs, the mark can be about 5% less.
Yeah, no, those are rules that we can write down. So in fact, no, it doesn't work. It doesn't work that way. I mean, I can't guarantee it. That's the problem. The government needs you to give 18% reservation or whatever they say, right? That has to be 18%. It doesn't work if my system gives 16%. Or it doesn't work if my system gives 22%. But my system will be, probabilistically will give you the right ballpark, right? But on the sample of students who wrote the exam that year, it could be 22, it could be 18, so 17, 15.
It will be used for a person. Check what the chances are.
No. That's not how you're using it. I mean, you're talking about different problem.
So one I guess broad comment that I made is that maybe conditioned by years of conventional big systems. Computers are infinite. 1 plus 1 is always.
Yep.
There's a fundamental difference between our traditional view and the new AI systems are like consultants.
Yeah.
You kind of give a good answer most of the time. And we say it depends. So that's a mindset.
Yeah, exactly. So this is something which I also mention very often. The problem, see, one question that people ask me, right? Hey, human decision making was biased. So what if the AI makes a biased decision? And this is what we have been living with so far. So what's wrong with that? Right? It's exactly what's wrong. Because we are used to thinking that machines are infallible. Right? And you say, you put this in. This is one. The second thing is, everybody is going to be biased in slightly different way. You put a machine in that has internalized bias and has now settled into one bias, you are institutionalizing it. Right? So everywhere the same bias is going to get replicated, and therefore it's a much more dangerous thing. Right? The bias in the machine A it's going to be hard for you to accept its bias, and B, you're institutionalizing the bias. So these are very difficult things. Right? So the next thing I want to talk about is this whole, black box nature of what you learn, right? So this is a quote from Richard Feynman. If you can't explain something to a first year student, then you haven't really understood it. So if you're talking about teaching physics, right? So if you can't explain a concept to a first year student, you haven't really understood it, right? So there are things like this happen. Self-driving Uber car kills pedestrian Arizona, where robots roam. This is a headline from New York Times. It turns out that, for whatever reason, the car actually noticed the pedestrian, right? But still chose to just drive on and hit the pedestrian because it never classified that object it noticed as a pedestrian, as a human being. Right? And now it brings into question a whole bunch of other things. I was a driver in the car. He didn't notice it also. So who is responsible for this active car? That's another whole can of worms, right? So all of these issues will come in now. But the question here is, the accident happened, and Uber can't explain why the accident happened. It tells you that, okay, for some reason it didn't classify that person as a pedestrian, but we don't know why. And why is that the case? Because of these kinds of things, right? So we're talking about models that have billions of parameters. So looking into the model and actually trying to understand what the model is doing, it's just not happening, right? So explanations work something like this. So this is the image here, right? And then I label that there is a dog in the image, and I ask, okay, why did you say there is a dog? And then I can give you an explanation saying that these are the set of pixels in the image that caused me to label it a dog. Why did you label it a cat? And it says, these are the set of pixels that caused me to label it a cat. But that's not really the cat. I mean, the cat is here, right? I mean, it's like the carpet next to the cat and a little bit of the hind leg of the cat and all that is caught as an explanation. And in fact, there is another famous example where it's shown a picture of a wolf, right? And the AI says there is a wolf in the picture, right? And when you ask it, why do you say there is a wolf in the picture? It shows pixels that correspond to snow. Because it says, okay, there is wolf, it's always seen, wolves only in pictures with snow in the background. So it has latched onto the snow and now it says that that's a wolf. I can give explanations like this, but it really doesn't make me truly understand what is going on, right? What is going on, but it at least allows me to do some kind of debugging, right?
No, stuff like TensorFlow.
Sorry?
Stuff like TensorFlow.
TensorFlow is just a tool, just like, yeah.
No, it's supposed to, step by step, it's supposed to for the
marketing. TensorFlow is just another tool, right? It helps you implement neural networks more efficiently, right? It doesn't do this. I mean, there are some tools that people have talked about that do explanations, right? But they're not quite what you want, right? I mean, even if suppose you're a person, right? I mean, I just throw you some pixels like this, it's going to be hard for you to understand, right? But here is a hypothetical conversation that I cooked up for one of the presentations I made, right? So in healthcare, people are talking about deep neural networks, right? AI being very, very successful. So here is a conversation. So the AI has identified something as being, as person having diabetic retinopathy. So you ask, hey, why did you say he has diabetic retinopathy? And then it highlights some pixels and says, okay, all these pixels look like, pixels from a person with diabetic retinopathy I have seen before. Right? And then the doctor says, oh, that's just, normal age-related degeneration things, right? And then the AI comes back and you did not show that to me earlier. It's your fault. So it's not my fault. But I can't say that. I'm in a hypothetical conversation.
Modern people. If you ask some old people the same problems, and they were marked as good. It's
a challenge. It's a challenge. It's a challenge. It's a challenge. Oops. Okay, it says I'm playing music. Okay. Yeah, I need to dismiss this. Sorry. So But it's actually it's not easy, right? So, for example, if people have this kind of macular, I mean, some kind of a condition, then you can go and ask them permission to use their data. How many normal people will you go and ask permission for using their data for doing these kinds of studies? And when we talk about medical, again, that's a systemic issue for this.
Amazing amount of data.
Sorry?
It seems to be amazing amount of data.
Oh, sir, we have been doing a lot of work with this.
I'm working on it.
Okay. Right?
I'm working on it.
Okay, we can talk about this offline.
NIH.
No. So all of that is fine. See.
NIH has about 100,000 chess X-rays.
Okay, so we will talk about this offline. There are a whole bunch of problems with it. Now, you are asking me to change the protocol, right? 100,000 chest X-rays somebody gives you. You say, no. There is this problem with this particular, condition. So I want you to go get more patients with that condition, and then it's very hard. I'm talking to doctors, right? I mean, it's very hard to change the protocol. So that's exactly the problem, right? But I don't know how many old people I need to come see so that the learning is offset. It's not enough I show one old person with this condition and label that person as being clean, right? Not having diabetic retinopathy. So it's not clear. But what your point is correct, right? It's taken, well taken. So you still have to ask, even though the AI can't tell you that it is your fault, you still have to keep asking yourself, is it your fault, right? So when does it stop? When do you give up your responsibility, and when you say that this is the best I can do? And I'm not sure, right? Whether you have done enough of failure testing for all the AI that goes through. Yeah. Then we'll get 4 decisions.
Might.
Yeah. You might not, but I'm saying. Okay. Sure. I'm sorry.
Asking so many questions.
Sure, no, please. I'm so used to sitting in classrooms and lecturing with absolute silence on the other end. I'm happy to have questions. In fact, sometimes I stop and ask people, am I still connected? Because online teaching is taking a great toll on all sides. Anyway, so here is an example of what happens, right? The AI we're talking about explaining, is talking about robustness, right? So this is a school bus, right? Now I added some noise. Okay, so this is the new image. Let me get back my pointer. So that's a new image. Okay, what is this? Obviously an ostrich. You're not looking at it properly. No, that's what the AI said. It said it's an ostrich. Okay, this is where the wheeled ostrich reference comes from. So it's very easy in some sense, right? Some of the AI systems that we train are pretty brittle, right? So here are more examples, right? So take a panda, you add some noise, now it says it's a gibbon. The school bus became an ostrich. The dog with some noise became an ostrich. Right? So these are sometimes called adversarial inputs, but you don't need adversarial inputs for the AI to go fantastically wrong, right? So the bail decisions are not really trained with adversarial inputs. There is this famous example of a Google image classifier labeling black people as gorillas, because it didn't have enough black people with their training data. So it could be very well that the inadequacy of the training data itself can cause errors, but even more so if you have this kind of adversarial settings, right? These can cause errors as well. In fact, I always jokingly say that AI has had the largest success in the consumer space, where the cost of mistakes is very small. So if Alexa doesn't understand me, I'm happy to say that 3 times. In fact, yesterday night I had to tell it to turn off the lights 5 times before it did. It's okay, right? It's not killing anybody. There's no lost productivity or anything, right? But once you start putting these things out into things where there are real financial costs to AI making wrong decisions, or even worse, human costs to AI making wrong decisions, then we have to really start thinking about all these issues, the robustness, the fairness, and all that. Right? So and we talked about learning from self-play and how reinforcement learning is so great, and then it was learning things that humans couldn't see. Right? This is something that was trained from this kind of a similar setting, right? So it's learning to play football, and then it's pretty good, and then it scores goals and things like that. Then what happens when the goalie decides to not play, right? It just lies down on the ground and then starts flailing its arms around. And the player also gets completely confused. You can see that it's not even going towards the ball. It's completely broken because the goalie did something that it was unexpected. It never saw while it went through its training phase, right? Of course, if you continue doing this for 10,000 more hours, it will learn to play. Even when the goalie falls down, it will learn to kick the ball into the goal. But what was a robust, what we thought was a very good policy, because wherever the ball was, it used to run after that and still kick it into the goal. Suddenly, when the goalie is not playing along, right, it just doesn't know what to do. Right? So this is another issue, right? So let's one final thing, right, about this responsible or this whole AI being safe and responsible, right? So let's say that you somehow got permission from humans to use some confidential data to train. Right? You put out a model, and then you're trying to use it in the world, and then there is some kind of adversary who comes in who looks at the data, right? And then somehow recovers this confidential data. It's not a hypothetical setting. It happened when Netflix released their data for what was called the Netflix challenge, right? About 10 years back, right? So they basically said, I'm going to release anonymized data. So user movie preferences, ratings, and things like that. They said, I'm not giving you any user data, therefore it's all safe, right? And people were able to actually figure out who the actual names behind this watching behavior by kind of joining it with other sources of data. So here's the conclusion here. Releasing the data and just removing names does nothing for privacy. If you know their name and a few records, then you can identify that person in other private databases. So it became a huge problem with that, right? So again, so you want to build private and safe AI. Right? So we have not yet come to a point where things are being launched on more critical databases yet, even though people use AI to de-anonymize health records. In the US, and they actually released the health records of the Massachusetts governor publicly, just to make a point, right? They were not doing it maliciously, just to make a point that these things were not safe, right? But then, as we use this more and more, right? So this is going to become imperative that we look at, right? So putting together, there's a lot of move for looking at what is called responsible AI. It's something which there are a few centers, very few centers across the world that started talking about responsible AI. And so here are what we call as the considerations for responsible AI. So you have to understand the functioning. I was telling you earlier, right? You have to figure out why it was going wrong and try to explain it, right? And then even when it's working right, I still have to explain the decisions to the end user, right? So why am I saying that you have a particular condition? Or why am I denying you the loan, right? So only then will the user start trusting what you're doing, right? So that's another thing that look at. But look at consistency across stakeholders, right? So that the fairness holds, right? And then this is one thing which I really didn't talk about, but attention to inclusion. It shouldn't be the case that because I've adopted an AI solution, I am excluding certain category of people from availing of the services. And accountability, liability. So who is really at fault? And then also talk about privacy risks, right? Unintended leakage of information. We talked about security risks, robustness to adversarial attacks. Again, we looked at. Finally, societal concerns, which I didn't touch upon today, but there are things like fake news and other kinds of malicious or fake videos and other kinds of malicious use of AI, right? And what about the impact on jobs? Right? What job displacement in a country like India, we have to worry about those as well, right? So it's not like just because AI is more efficient, if I do that, I really have to worry about the impact on jobs, and also impact on other things. In fact, so we are doing a study at IITM on how would already the move to digital banking has had significant impact on for the internally displaced people in India, like migrant laborers and things like that. Right? Already that's a big impact. Now, if I put AI into these services, is there a way to reduce the problem, reduce the disadvantage people have in accessing these services? One thing could be, one way of looking at it could be, hey, if I put AI in, maybe I start to need smartphones and more powerful things to access these services. Other way of thinking about it is, hey, you put AI in, you can just make it talk. I can use all this voice recognition and all the natural language processing tools that AI has built and just make it as if they are just talking to a teller in a bank, even when they're using digital banking services. Is that the direction that we could move in? So what are the issues? What is really stopping them? Understanding those kinds of things also becomes important, right? So all of these put together comes under this whole broader question of responsible AI. In fact, I took these from a document that the Niti Aayog put out some time back, which kind of gels with the global picture as well, right? And I don't know. So should I just stop here? I'm happy to stop here. I have a couple of more slides on other real world considerations that I can talk about. There's nothing to do with this.
There are some questions on the chat, but I'll just off the one or two that.
Sure.
Okay. One of them was the question that on the chat was that machines we use to train other machines. And I sort of highlighted by the fact that machines that demonstrate the right code, like last year, that code can be based on some things given by these things as well. Whatever it claims to do or makes it can. So thoughts on that. So are we at the stage looking at this? Machines are not really at a good enough stage for us to do many things like you highlighted. Can we start trusting machines to train other machines or write code and do more complicated things? So,
see, I mean, the machines writing code, right? There are a couple of things that people have tried. Even before GPT-3 created this thing, right? So people are looking at using sequence generators like LSTMs and so on and so forth to actually train a machine to write code. For example, come up with a way to sort numbers in order, right? By just presenting to them unsorted numbers or sorted numbers. Right? I'll just give you some random list of numbers and then I'll give you those numbers in order. Just by looking at these examples, can you learn how to write a program that will sort these numbers? And people demonstrated that it can do that. Right? And can you do multi-digit addition? Just by giving it single-digit addition. Right? So all of these things, but they're still, like Ananth said, they're still gimmicky. Right? So it's really not something that they can. Not at a point where I am trusted to write code for a problem that I have not already written code for. Right. So that is the place where we are at. But we have to really look at what is happening with these new math proofs and other things that DeepMind has claimed. It's fairly very recent, like a couple of weeks old, right? But one thing about both these recent success stories, both the math story and the chemistry story, is that significant involvement of human in the loop. It was not like it was an AI completely unaccompanied. Right? Maybe there were some small components of it that was solved by AI, and still those are leaps which humans would have found difficult to make. But still, there was a strong human in the loop component to it, right? So as long as we are having that kind of a hybrid model, I'm happy to trust AI to solve some well-defined optimization problems for me. But
so which takes me to another question on the chat. Question basically to say that you trust the AI part, but I'm thinking back different one of the intelligent automation versus artificial intelligence. Automation is kind of more from that seems to be very promising. Any practical applications. So yeah, but there's always an expert or people that has the right reference for your thoughts on IDA, which is AI bots kind of story, versus going after this land challenge, which is where many of these issues of trusting AI do things that humans do not necessarily. How far away is that?
See, I mean, artificial general intelligence is what keeps the field humming in some sense, right? So I don't think we should stop making attempts at artificial intelligence, right? So I think we have made significant progress because we are trying to solve that. It's just like alchemy, right? So we made significant advances in metallurgy and in some kind of chemical process just by trying to turn metals into gold, right? all metals into gold, right? So even though that's obviously not something that's going to work, but it did cause a lot of attachment in. So I think trying to solve AGI is like that. I mean, not to say that we can never achieve it. Maybe we will, maybe we will not. But we should. I mean, all of these advances that you are saying that, hey, this AI tool development, right? So all that's happening. It's because people are trying to solve the AGI problem. Quite a few of them come about because they're trying to solve the AGI problem. So I think that should be the driver for research. But having said that, we shouldn't get too carried away by the AGI promise and then let the AI out unaccompanied into the real world. And there are a few places. For example, Alexa, like it's a same example. And Alexa is fine. I don't need a human verifying every utterance I make to Alexa, right? Or something like Google Maps, right? That's okay. I mean, I've actually been navigated by Google Maps to cul-de-sacs. Literally, it will tell me to drive through a wall to get to the other side, right? India, it happened in Besanagar. So that's a chain fence. There's one of those barbed wire fences there. It's basically asking me to drive through the barbed wire fence, right? So it's okay. I mean, it's not going to kill me. I just have to go around another half kilometer around somewhere to figure out where there is no fence and then go to the other side. So it's okay. I mean, again, the cost of failure is low. You can leave. You can let the AI do whatever AI do, solo work. But when the critical things like this, I would still not trust the AI to go along.
There's a very practical question from Vikram, assume he's a student.
Okay.
He's saying, what kind of jobs will I get in AI?
What kind of? Well, you have to answer. You have to answer.
So, Vikram, today there is a lot of jobs in research assistantships, doing masters, doing PhD, and like Professor said, lots and lots of unsolved problems. If you are academically oriented, I think you can have a rich career in this for the next 30 years, 40 years, no problem. If you're looking for industry jobs, we are trying to industrialize AI to the extent that how do large-scale AI systems be built, managed, delivered, supported for people. So yes, there are research jobs and there are a lot of industrial research jobs in AI. But equally, there are tasks which need like training on large data sets. I mean, it requires a lot of human effort to build a data set, to label it, train it, do all these kinds of things that the surgeon talked about. All that is done by people. And lastly, to handle all those 8 different things that the ETI system has put out, that requires enormous amount of work.
Yeah. In fact, it requires enormous amount of government. I mean, work from the government side also. Policymakers have to do a whole bunch of things for it, right? So.
And lastly, any industry which plans to use AI, there was a direct example in one of the slides. I think doctors, if they want to use such systems, they have to actively participate in such work. It's not research, it's not being applied carefully. Subject matter expertise is enormously important in any field which is planned in here. Medicine was shown here, but industrial applications or financial applications or transportation problem, retailing, warehousing, all of those need human beings who are expert in the domain. So the importance of subject matter expertise in applying AI cannot be understated. So don't worry, you want to educate for a student, don't worry, you want to do careers sitting ready for you.
So I work for a short time. That's doing all right. I would still say it's in early phases, not too early. See, a lot of sensors on vehicles, a lot of data that's being collected. But one major key that is not just to rely on the traditional interpretation of it, which is more of machine learning, data analytics, right? So, for example, I'll give an example, right? So, we want to predict when the vehicle is going to fail, when something's going to go wrong, when before it fails, right? So, this is a very classic AI problem. Collect a lot of data, these kinds of sensors from the engine, from fuel tank, from driver, right? And you can use, theoretically, you can use that data to learn when certain failures are going to happen, when certain components are going to fail, etc. But behind all of this, there is a backbone of science. Science, when I say science, there is an electrical model, there's a mechanical model, there's a chemical model, running. So the physics-based model is actually running as a backbone of the system. So Ananth's point, everyone's point, I guess, the domain, right, expertise, I would say comes first, right? So the literally the simulation is running based on the real-time data that is coming from the data. On top of that, you have the learning, which I would say is a slightly dumber part, but it honestly helps you combined with the science that's running in the background. Right? So to me, the combination of those two is what really has worked and will work.
So completely agree with you on that. Because, I mean, that's a different talk that I usually try to sell to people, especially people who are coming from domains where there's a good amount of physics is already existing, right? Models that go into understanding it. In fact, I mean, I have a lot more slides. One of my later slides I actually talk about having to use domain information to the extent possible. In fact, that's currently a very active area of work in our center, right?
Questions for Can you would you have any idea on how to use AI to reduce regulatory red tape in the bureaucracy and governance systems, especially in Tabal, to ensure that people who should get the Tabal get it on time? I mean, those seem to be very fundamental, basic issues. So probably AI is dealing with much bigger things, but I guess a lot of the consequences of inaction here are pretty severe. So.
Some of these problems, actually, the biggest challenge is the human factor, right? In fact, we have tried. I mean, now I was in a meeting with arranged by the Tamil Nadu e-governance authority yesterday, right? And they are actually trying to do a whole bunch of automation of the various processes, but even internally. Right? In fact, only now the government has a policy of data exchange between departments. Right? So before that, they were not even opening up data from one department to another within the government. Right? So where can external people go in and try and improve those systems? Right? So in theory, yes, we should be able to improve. And there is so much work that has been done in improving efficiency at a much larger scale also. So we should be able to do that as long as there is willingness to open up, right, and then look at things. Right? And I do believe that Telangana government has done a lot of automation of these processes, right? And so even Karnataka is giving a lot of services now. Things are going fast. So only yesterday, I think they launched one of those first. No, I shouldn't say first. They already have a lot of services that are running for agriculture in Tamil Nadu also. Yesterday, they launched something on being able to pay some. I'm not aware of exactly the details. But this is basically, as long as you have a fingerprint identification, you can just get it done. Right? So you don't have to worry about standing in the queue, going to a place and driving somebody, etc., etc. So this is the automation thing that I've used. So partly the battle here is fighting the system to get this change in place. Right? In fact, yeah.
That's an HI problem.
It's a HI problem. Yeah.
Just one more question. I want to understand what you said. Systems where there is not too much of a variation in the and some possibilities of response where it is restricted, saying this is the way you take ideas, looks very successful. Like you know these are the ways that we take this, not new. But when it comes to spaces like EdTech, where every child is going to be different, every environment is going to be different, how do you see AI is going to really make this move? Because even the learning sciences are there too.
Yeah, so that's true, right? So what AI can do in such instances, right, is help you give you a slate of models which then the human can evaluate as to whether this is really something that makes sense for me from a pedagogy point of view, right? So does it make sense? So that's something that can be done, right? So for example, I know work in the EdTech space where people have assumed certain factors as influencing the learning behavior of a child, right? And then they have used data to determine the relative weightage of those factors, right? So the AI is not deriving those factors from scratch; it just can't, right? It's just too hard. But then, or you need really large volumes of data, several years of training, and things like that. But something that is more practical is that some people who are very well versed in pedagogy come up and say that, okay, we think that these are the 15 or 30 factors that can influence how a child learns, right? And the AI goes ahead and tries to fit these models and says, okay, these factors are always correlated. It can make all these kinds of judgments about that. I shouldn't say judgments, these are inferences, right? They are not really judgments. You can make all kinds of inferences and then give you options of, okay, here are like 4 or 5 potential models that could be explaining what the child is going through, and then the expert can take the call.
How do you contribute to such projects where there's some on the field observers and there is some project that there is no right now?
No, it varies from vertical to vertical. There are some verticals in which there is a lot more understanding of this need for collaboration. For example, we work very closely with the transportation system guys. Anything to do with transportation, then we have a team that will look at it. Right? People from civil engineering and from CS and who can understand algorithms, vision, and everything. Likewise, we work very closely with biologists, right? And in some cases, we work closely with doctors also, trying to understand how what we are doing, whether it makes sense or not in the AI. So for certain verticals, this is pretty clear, right? So one thing which I really feel that we need to do a lot of work, especially given Chennai is a manufacturing hub, right? We don't have that kind of a conversation going on in the manufacturing space that much. Right? So I mean, so this has to happen vertical by vertical, and I don't think there is a easy answer for it.
So one question, just one question, please. I just wanted to ask: is there a significant role for a sectoral regulator?
The reason I'm asking this question is singular data, like for example, data, failure, etc., are easy to iterate and maybe for BI but in a situation where you are trying to label criminals, it's one wrongly convicted criminal is one too many. So shouldn't separate the secular aspect of society and living, and then try and focus on those and wait until the regulatory mechanism is in place before societal biases come in place. So no, I agree with you that we need strong regulatory mechanisms for some of these applications, right? In fact, even so whatever work we are starting to do in the responsible AI space, we are taking it vertical at a time. Right? So we are not trying to solve the problem for everything, right? So in fact, each vertical is going to look at things differently. So what is acceptable for maybe even that one false positive is not acceptable in the judicial system, and I'm okay with that in other kinds of domains. Right? So this has to happen vertical by vertical, but I think technology should play a role in regulation also. At least to know, right? I mean, the information flow should be both ways. The regulator should know what is even technologically feasible and possible before they start putting in regulations, right? Maybe they should just shut down certain areas, saying that, okay, these are the safeguards that we will need, but the technologies tell us that we are nowhere close to being able to really implement those safeguards. So no AI in these sectors, right? So at least to understand that much, right? That should be a conversation between the technologists and the regulators. The technology should know what are the kinds of, safeguards that the regulators would need, and then work towards that, right? So I think that this conversation should happen. It's not happening, not just in India, right? It's not happening. Globally, it's not happening enough, right? That's why you keep coming up with all kinds of really hard regulatory things, which every technological companies immediately goes to the court to fight, saying that we can't comply with that, and all these things are happening because they're not involved in this dialogue. That's something that needs to happen.
Thanks also perhaps the most interactive of my people so far. The live audience is very good. Really different. Hopefully you will see more of you okay. So on behalf of our president, Balaji is here, thank you so much for being here. You will, of course, people here will continue the discussions for the stay with your house. Still one seat there for folks who have been actually there. So, and that will pause the online session.
Thank you everybody online for joining
I
us.
just have one slide that I wanted to show, right? So this is what I say, right? AI is undoubtedly successful, but the current AI's understanding of what the world it's operating in is like a 2-year-old, right? So you have to handle it really with care, because it's more like this 2-year-old. Okay. So if you don't use it properly, it can cause all kinds of trouble. So that's what I want.
Thank you so much.
Can I stop the Zoom call?